Thunder rolled across the spires of Aldenfort like a warning from the heavens themselves. Princess Seraphine Alden stood on the balcony outside the council chamber, her fingers curled tightly around the cold stone railing. Far below, the banners of Aldoria snapped in the wind, red and gold, worn from years of battle and smoke. She had grown up with those banners. She had watched soldiers march beneath them every spring, and she had watched too many return only in the quiet of night, carried on stretchers draped in the same colors. Another boom of thunder shook the air. Or perhaps it was simply the echo of siege engines in the distance. These days it was hard to tell. A soft footstep approached behind her. "Your father calls for you," said General Rowan Blackthorn. Seraphine turned. The general's dark beard was streaked with gray, and exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like armor he could no longer shed. He had fought for Aldoria since before she was born, and he knew, perhaps better than anyone, how badly they were losing. "He's made up his mind, hasn't he?" Seraphine asked. Rowan's silence was answer enough. She drew in a slow breath and stepped inside. The council chamber was lit by a dozen flickering braziers, their flames casting uneasy light over the long oak table. King Alden IV stood at its head, crown set aside, hands braced against maps covered in black ink, enemy formations, supply lines, the ever-shifting borders of a war that no longer had clear sides. His face was haggard, his once golden hair fading to white at the temples. Across from him stood the elven delegation. Seraphine had never met elves before. She had seen them only in paintings, slender, graceful, adorned in shimmering silver garments crafted from magic and moonlight. She had believed the paintings were embellishments. They were not. At the center of the group stood Prince Thalanor Virellen of Lunareth. Tall, poised, with hair the color of pale starlight braided down his back, he was every bit as regal as the poets described. His expression, however, was cool as winter frost. Seraphine stiffened. It felt wrong to see an elf within Aldenfort's walls. Too many of her people had fallen to elven arrows for her to welcome the sight. Her father noticed her and gestured her forward. "Seraphine, we were waiting for you." She approached, chin high. "Your Highness," Thalanor said with a slight bow. His voice was smooth, measured, so calm it seemed almost taunting. "Prince," she answered, refusing to bow in return. King Alden exhaled heavily. "We have come to an agreement." Seraphine's stomach tightened. "No, not this." "The war cannot continue," her father said. "Our fields are dying, our people starving. Lunareth faces the same fate. The Council of Elders has invoked the Treaty of Eversong." She stared at him, disbelief tightening her throat. "That treaty only applies when the royal lines." "Yes," her father's voice broke with regret. "A marriage pact between you and the Prince of Lunareth." Seraphine felt the world tilt. Her heart hammered painfully. "Father, you cannot ask this of me." "This is not a request," Thalanor said softly. She whipped her gaze to him, fury rising hot and sharp. "I wasn't speaking to you." His expression didn't change, but his eyes, icy blue, impossibly clear, narrowed a fraction. "Nevertheless, it concerns me." Seraphine clenched her fists. "I don't want to marry you. I don't even know you." "And I have no desire to marry a human princess," he said. "Yet here we stand." The brazier flames crackled, filling the tense silence. King Alden sank into his seat. "This is the only path left. The marriage will unite Aldoria and Lunareth. Together we can rebuild. Together we can survive." "And if we refuse?" Seraphine whispered. Thalanor answered before her father could. "Then both kingdoms fall. The treaty is all that stands between peace and annihilation." A cold dread settled in her bones. Seraphine looked at her father, the man who had always been gentle, who had taught her music, who cried silently when her mother died from an elven mage fire strike 5 years ago. He looked older than she had ever seen him. "This is bigger than either of us," he said softly. "I am sorry, my daughter." Her throat tightened, and she could only nod. Hours later, after the treaty was signed and sealed, the delegation moved to the great hall for a formal supper. Seraphine barely touched her food. She could feel the elves watching her, judging her posture, her attire, her very existence. Thalanor sat beside her at the long table, the silver embroidery on his tunic glinting in the firelight. He ate with impeccable grace. He barely looked at her, When he finally spoke, it was without emotion. You stare as if I've personally raised your kingdom. Have you? She snapped. He paused, setting down his goblet. No. Then forgive me for struggling to trust the people who have attacked my borders for years. His jaw tightened. The conflict began with human expansion into our sacred groves. And your retaliations have burned entire villages. Because your armies refused to withdraw. They glared at each other, neither willing to yield. Finally, Thalanor sighed, the faintest trace of weariness slipping through his composure. This union is political necessity, nothing more. Then we agree on something, Seraphine muttered. He rose from the table, bowing stiffly. I will retire for the evening, Princess. She watched him walk away, frustrated beyond words. If this was her future husband, she was doomed. When the hall finally emptied, Seraphine wandered through the dim corridors of the castle until she reached the small music chamber near the western tower. Her favorite refuge? She sank onto the bench beside her lute, running her fingers lightly over the strings. The instrument was warm beneath her hand, familiar, comforting. Slowly, she began to play. A soft melody drifted through the room, one her mother used to sing. A song of hope and springtime, of peace that once felt inevitable. Her vision blurred. How could she marry someone she despised? How could she tie her future to a kingdom that had taken so much from her people? The door creaked. Seraphine turned sharply. General Rowan stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame. For a moment, neither spoke. That song, he said quietly. I haven't heard it since the Queen passed. Seraphine looked down at her hands. Everything is changing, Rowan, and I don't know how to stop any of it. The old general approached, his steps slow but steady. You don't have to like the prince, he said. You don't have to forgive the elves. But you do have to endure this. Your people need you. Seraphine swallowed. And what about what I need? Rowan's gaze softened. You are a princess. Sometimes your needs come last. She closed her eyes, the weight of her destiny pressed down like a mountain. At dawn, the gates of Aldenfort opened to a silent crowd. Seraphine stood beside her father, cloaked in deep blue, her hair braided with silver thread as tradition dictated for royal journeys. Her belongings were loaded onto carriages. Elven guards on white steeds waited to escort her north to Lunareth. To her future, to her prison, Thalanor approached on horseback, his posture straight, expression unreadable. Are you prepared, princess? No, she said honestly, but I'm going anyway. He inclined his head, a rare acknowledgement. Then we leave. Seraphine mounted her horse. As they began the long ride from Aldoria, she cast one last look back at her home, the red and gold banners, the familiar stone walls, her father watching from the balcony with grief in his eyes. She lifted her chin. If this marriage was the only way to end the war, then she would endure it, even if it meant binding herself to a man she despised. Seraphine had never seen trees like these. They marched beneath boughs so tall the tops vanished into mist, trunks pale as moonlight and veined with faint silver that pulsed softly in the shadows. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine, frost, and something faintly sweet, like flowers that only bloomed at night. This is the edge of Lunareth, Thalanor said, riding slightly ahead, his voice carrying back to her. The Moonveil Forest. Seraphine kept her gaze forward. It looks unnatural. Unnatural? One of the elven riders echoed, offense sharpening his tone. Seraphine flushed. I mean, different. We have oaks, ash, maples. They don't glow. Thalanor's lips twitched, almost a smile. They are starbark trees. The sap carries residual magic from the world's making. They glow most strongly under the full moon. Of course they do, she muttered. Why wouldn't your trees be dramatic too? He did smile then, very slightly. They rode in silence for a while. The forest grew denser, the light laced with silver. Strange animals watched them from the branches, small fox-like creatures with feathery tails, birds whose wings left faint trails of light when they took flight. Seraphine tried not to stare, but it was impossible. She felt like she had stepped into one of the old stories nurses told children to make them behave. Wander too far, and the elves will take you away to their shimmering kingdoms beneath the hills. Except She wasn't being taken. She was being traded. After hours of riding, the trees thinned and the ground rose. The path opened to a ledge, and the world below the cliff stole her breath. Lunareth was carved from light and stone. A vast valley lay beneath them, ringed by mountains that shimmered like crystal. At its heart stood the elven city. Towers that curved like growing vines, walkways suspended between them, cascading pools that caught the fading daylight. Bridges of woven branches and pale stone stretched across streams that glittered with an inner glow. Music drifted faintly on the air, high, pure tones like glass being gently struck. Seraphine swallowed. That's your capital? Lunara, Thalanor said, the heart of Lunareth. She didn't want to be impressed. She really truly didn't, but she was. The approach to Lunara was lined with white-barked trees bearing lanterns that glowed softly, no flame visible within. Elven guards in silver armor stood at intervals, spears grounded, eyes alert. Their gazes slid over Seraphine with a mix of curiosity and disdain, as if she were an interesting but distasteful insect. The city gates were not gates at all, but two living trees grown into an arch, branches interlocking overhead. As their party passed beneath, Seraphine felt a gentle, tingling pressure on her skin, as though she were being weighed and measured by the air itself. She shivered. The warding recognizes foreign magic and hostile intent, Thalanor said without turning. You've nothing to fear unless you plan to attack us. Lovely, she replied. I'll be sure to restrain my violent impulses at the dinner table. He ignored that. Elves filled the streets. Tall, slender, draped in garments of pale blues, greens, silvers. Many wore their hair braided with thin strands of metal and gemstones. They stepped back as the riders passed, watching in silence. Seraphine caught a few murmured words in the lilting elven tongue, the tone unmistakable. Human? Why? Mismatched? Mistake? She straightened in her saddle, jaw tight. Let them stare. She refused to shrink beneath their disdain. At last they reached a wide, circular courtyard ringed by crystal pillars. A broad set of steps led up to a palace that looked as though it had been coaxed from the mountain rather than built. Arches and balconies carved directly from stone, veined with silver, vines trained along railings heavy with pale blue flowers. At the top of the steps stood an elven woman in a gown that shimmered like moonlight on water, her hair an elegant river of silver and black. A delicate crown circled her brow, shaped like overlapping leaves. Queen Lirael Virellen. Thalanor dismounted and bowed deeply. Mother. Welcome home, my son. Her voice was cool and measured, the echo of Thalanor's, but with a steel edge. She inclined her head to him, then turned her attention to Seraphine. Every inch of Seraphine's training rose to the surface. She dismounted, smoothing her cloak, and climbed the steps with measured grace. When she reached the queen, she dipped into a respectful curtsy. Your Majesty, Seraphine said, I am honored to be received in Lunara. Queen Lirael regarded her for a long, unreadable moment. Her eyes were an unusual shade, a pale, almost luminous green. Princess Seraphine of Aldoria, the queen said. You look tired from your journey. Seraphine forced a polite smile. It was long, but I am well enough. That is fortunate. The queen's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, though her eyes did not mirror it. You are far from home. I trust my son has shown you proper courtesy. Thalanor's expression flickered, just once. I have fulfilled my duty. Good, Lirael said. Then let us pray you both continue to do so. There was warmth in her words, but no heat. A pair of elven women stepped forward from the shadows behind the queen. Twins, by the look of them, with dark hair braided over one shoulder and matching pale blue gowns. One smiled brightly. The other's expression was neutral, bordering on cold. These will attend you during your stay, the queen said. Lyra and Melian. They will see you to your chambers and help you prepare for tonight's supper. Seraphine inclined her head to them. Thank you. The smiling twin, Lyra, offered a respectful bow. We are honored to serve, Princess. Melian merely nodded. As Seraphine followed them into the palace, she felt Thalanor's gaze on her back. She did not look back. Her chambers were stunning. High ceilings crossed by elegantly carved beams. Tall windows draped with gauzy curtains that let in soft, silver-tinged light. A balcony overlooking Lunara's cascading pools and bridges. A bed carved from pale wood, its headboard shaped like curling leaves, piled with blankets as soft as silk. It felt less like a room and more like a painting come to life. Seraphine walked to the window and looked out. The city spread before her, towers, terraces, glowing bridges, trees woven into architecture. It was beautiful, overwhelming, alien. It is not to your liking? Melian's voice was calm, but there was a hint of suspicion. Seraphine turned. It's very beautiful. Lyra smiled, relief softening her features. We are glad. The queen ordered that the finest guest chambers be prepared. Guest, not future queen. Seraphine noticed the choice of words. We have laid out clothing appropriate to Lunareth court, Melian added, gesturing to a nearby stand where a gown of soft, shimmering fabric hung. For tonight's supper. Seraphine's stomach tightened. Is there something wrong with what I brought? Lyra hesitated. Only that human fabrics are heavier. Our gatherings can last long into the night. You may find this more comfortable. And, Seraphine thought dryly, they want me wrapped in their colors, their customs, their expectations. Still, she nodded. Picking a fight over a dress would only make things worse. Lyra helped her change. The gown was pale blue with a silver belt, the fabric light and cool against her skin, the sleeves draped from her shoulders in delicate folds. When she moved, it whispered softly, like wind through leaves. You look very graceful, Lyra said, sincere. Seraphine caught her reflection in the polished silver mirror, lighter colors, hair partially braided in elven style, a stranger staring back. I look, she said quietly, like someone else's idea of me. Lyra blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. Melian stepped in. We must not be late. The queen expects promptness. Of course she does. The supper hall was smaller than Aldenfort's great hall, but no less grand. The ceiling arched in sweeping curves, carved with scenes of stars and forests. Lanterns hung suspended in midair, their soft light reflecting off crystal goblets and polished silverware. Elven nobles filled the tables, some seated, some standing in small clusters, murmuring in low tones. Conversation paused when Seraphine entered, Lyra and Melian a step behind. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. She hesitated. Then she lifted her chin and crossed the room. Thalanor stood near the head table beside Queen Lirael and an older elf with hair like spun frost, an advisor perhaps, or a high counselor. His gaze flicked over her, unreadable. The queen gestured gracefully. Princess Seraphine, allow me to present Counselor Uranus Veller, Elder of the High Council. Uranus inclined his head. We are pleased the journey did not break you, Princess. Seraphine forced a polite smile. I assure you, Counselor, humans are sturdier than we appear. A few elves nearby exchanged glances, some amused, some not. They took their seats, Queen Lirael at the head, Thalanor at her right, Seraphine at her left. Dishes of artfully arranged food appeared. Slivers of roasted root vegetables, delicate rolls filled with spiced mushrooms, petals of some luminous flower arranged like a star. Seraphine did her best not to stare. Elven cuisine felt less like a meal and more like something one might place in a shrine. As they began to eat, the queen spoke lightly, though Seraphine could sense the weight behind her words. We hope you find Lunareth tolerable, Princess. It cannot compare to the rugged charm of stone fortresses, I am sure. Seraphine smiled thinly. Your city is very beautiful. I can see why you guard it so fiercely. A murmur, quickly suppressed. Uranus took a sip of wine. Beauty must be protected from those who do not understand its value. Someone might say the same about fertile farmlands, Seraphine replied, or villages where children sleep peacefully. Those, too, have value. Thalanor's hand tightened slightly around his goblet. Queen Lirael's gaze sharpened, but her tone remained smooth. Our cultures use different measures. That is why this union is necessary, to teach both sides restraint. And trust, Thalanor added. Seraphine flicked her gaze to him. Trust takes more than signatures on a treaty. It does, he agreed, which is why we must begin somewhere. Their eyes held for a moment, her anger, his cool determination, before the queen diverted the conversation to neutral topics. Trade, weather. The upcoming joining ceremony. Seraphine answered when addressed, smiled when expected, but she felt like a performer reciting a script she hadn't written. Her mind wandered, her fingers twitched. Music, she thought suddenly. If only she had her lute, she could ground herself in something familiar. But here, surrounded by strangers and cold courtesy, there was no comfort. Not yet. Later, when the formal courses ended, conversation loosened. A small group of musicians entered the hall, elves carrying strange, elegant instruments, a long, slender flute etched with runes, a harp that glowed faintly, and a stringed instrument she did not recognize. It resembled a lyre, but with a longer neck and a crescent-shaped body of pale wood. Its strings shimmered like spun moonlight. The musicians bowed and began to play. The music was unlike anything Seraphine had heard, intricate, layered, with melodies that twisted and spiraled like climbing vines. It was beautiful, yes, but also distant, controlled. Every note deliberate, nothing left raw. She listened, fascinated despite herself. That instrument, she murmured, more to herself than anyone. What is it? Thalanor glanced at her. A silver lyre. Silver lyre, she tasted the word. You play one? He hesitated. I do. Queen Lirael smiled faintly. My son is accomplished. Not as accomplished as he should be, Uranus said lightly, if he spent more hours in practice and fewer in war councils. A few nearby elves chuckled. Seraphine studied Thalanor's profile. For the first time, she saw something shift beneath the cold veneer. Pride, perhaps, or something more vulnerable. You play? Lirael asked Seraphine, tone almost idle. Yes, Seraphine said. Lute, mostly. Some harp. I sing as well. Ah, Uranus said. Human tavern songs? War chants? A bit of everything, Seraphine replied, refusing to bristle. Ballads, lullabies, hymns. We do have culture, counselor, despite the armor and mud. Lyra, standing a short distance away, hid a smile behind her hand. The joining ceremony, Queen Lirael said thoughtfully, ignoring Uranus. Music will be needed. It is tradition. Thalanor nodded. The song of binding must be performed. Uranus inclined his head. It would be a pity if the human half of the union were unable to match elven artistry. A perfect moment, Seraphine thought, to stay silent. She did not. I would be honored to contribute, she said evenly. If allowed. Thalanor turned his head fully to her, curiosity flickering in his gaze. You would sing before both courts? Yes. Brave, Uranus murmured, or foolish. It's often both, Seraphine said. Queen Lirael studied her for a heartbeat longer, then rose. The hall followed suit. Supper has concluded, the queen announced. We will reconvene in 3 days' time to begin preparations for the ceremony. Until then, we expect our guests to rest and observe our customs. There was an edge in that last phrase. Seraphine heard it clearly. As the nobles began to depart, Thalanor stepped away from the head table and murmured something to one of the musicians. The elf with the silver lyre nodded, then handed him the instrument with a respectful bow. Seraphine blinked. What are you doing? She asked. Thalanor didn't look at her as he tested the strings, adjusting a peg with practiced fingers. You are not the only one expected to contribute. Now? She asked incredulously. He lifted the silver lyre and began to play. The hall quieted. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. Then they strengthened, weaving into a melody that was both solemn and yearning. It rose and fell like a slow river, occasionally breaking into delicate cascades of sound that made the hair on Seraphine's arms stand up. He was good. No, he was very good. She forgot for a moment that he was an enemy, forgot the cold way he spoke, the war, the weight of expectation. There was something unguarded in the music, something searching, lonely, aching for something unnamed. She recognized that feeling. He finished with a lingering chord that shimmered in the air, silence, then polite applause from the elves in attendance. A few words of approval. Well done, Prince. A fine performance. They heard skill. Seraphine heard a confession. Thalanor handed the silver lyre back to the musician and turned to leave the hall, his composure firmly back in place. On impulse, she called after him. That song? What was it? He stopped, glanced back. An old Lunareth piece, the star alone. It sounded sad. His gaze held hers. You hear sadness. Yes. Most hear pride, his mouth quirked humorlessly, but sadness is closer to truth. Before she could respond, he inclined his head stiffly. "Good night, princess." And he was gone. Sleep did not come easily. Seraphine lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the carved canopy overhead, listening to the distant murmur of Lunareth's nocturnal life, the faint rush of water, the occasional call of some night bird, the soft hum of magic in the walls. "The star alone," she whispered. The melody lingered in her mind. She turned it over, mentally tracing the contour of each phrase. It was different from human songs, less structured, more fluid, but music had its own language, a bridge over any border. In the quiet, another thought took shape. If she could meet him there, in that shared language, perhaps there was a way to survive this without losing herself. Perhaps there was a way to make this more than a prison. She rose, padded to the small stand where her travel chest rested, and opened it carefully. Her lute lay inside, wrapped in soft cloth. She lifted it out, fingers automatically checking the tuning. The familiar weight grounded her, eased some of the tightness in her chest. On the balcony, the night was cool. Moonlight poured over Lunareth, turning everything silver blue. The pools below glowed softly, reflecting the stars. Seraphine sat on a small bench and laid the lute across her lap. She hesitated, listening for any sounds of patrolling guards. The last thing she wanted was to be accused of disturbing elven peace with human noise. Then she began to play. First, a simple Aldorian lullaby, gentle, lilting, the one she'd played for frightened children hiding in the castle cellars when the war had been at its worst. Her fingers moved easily, the melody a well-worn path. Then, cautiously, she reached for the memory of Thalanor's song. She picked out the opening notes of "The Star Alone" on her lute, tentative at first, then stronger as her hands adjusted to the elven intervals. It didn't fit perfectly. The lute's tone was warmer, humbler than the silver lyre's crystalline voice, but it worked. She played the first phrase, then changed it. Where his melody climbed and hovered, hers slipped sideways, adding a minor twist that deepened the sadness, then resolved into a softer cadence. Human, not elven. An answer, not a copy. She lost track of time. She was so focused on shaping the borrowed melody into something new that she didn't notice the shadow in the doorway until a floorboard creaked softly. Seraphine froze, fingers muting the strings. "Don't stop," a familiar voice said quietly. "You were nearly through the bridge." She twisted on the bench. Thalanor stood in the balcony doorway, hair loose over his shoulders, dressed in a simple dark tunic instead of his formal attire. He looked less untouchable like this, more like a person and less like a statue carved from ice. "How long have you been there?" she asked, heart suddenly racing. "Long enough to recognize my own song," he said, stepping closer, "and long enough to hear how you were changing it." She bristled. "If that's a problem, I can stop." He shook his head. No, it was interesting. Seraphine blinked. "Interesting." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "I didn't mean offense," she said finally. "It was just in my head. Sometimes the only way to make sense of something is to play it." Thalanor's gaze drifted to her lute. "The intervals are different on that instrument. You compensated quickly." "I've been playing since I could hold one." She hesitated. "You're not the only one who has spent hours in practice." His mouth twitched. "Our counselor would be relieved to hear it." She snorted. "Your counselor underestimates humans." "He underestimates everyone but himself," Thalanor said dryly. The comment startled a laugh from her. It slipped out before she could stop it, light and genuine. For a moment, his expression softened in response, as if stunned that she could make that sound. He gestured to the lute. "May I?" Her instinct screamed no. Her curiosity said yes. She handed it over. He cradled the instrument carefully, testing a few strings, adjusting his grip slightly. "It's lighter than a silver lyre." "And less ostentatious," she said. "That too." He plucked a few experimental notes, then found a simple scale. The music sounded different on the lute, less crystalline, more earthy. "You adapt fast," she said, despite herself. "I've had practice." He looked up. "War teaches versatility." The word hung between them like smoke. Gently, he began to play "The Star Alone," but altered, imitating the changes she had made. It wasn't exact, but he had clearly listened. He followed her new progression, then shifted it again, adding a subtle elven flourish at the end of each phrase. Now it was part his, part hers. When he finished, he handed the lute back. Your variation improves the middle section. She stared. Did you just compliment me? I acknowledge accuracy, he said. Compliment is too strong. That was a compliment, she said flatly. A hint of color crept into his cheeks. If you insist. They fell silent again, but it felt different this time, less hostile, less brittle. You said most people hear pride in that song, she said after a moment. Why sadness for you? Thalanor looked out over the moonlit city. When it was written, it was meant to honor a warrior who died guarding our borders, a declaration that Lunareth stands tall, alone, unbowed. He exhaled. It has been used in every war ceremony since. Your people hear glory, Seraphine said quietly. You hear the bodies behind it. Yes. She nodded slowly. We have songs like that too. He glanced at her. Play me one. She hesitated. Now. Unless that is forbidden by some human custom? His tone was mildly teasing. She rolled her eyes, then settled the lute against her shoulder. Fine. But you asked. She began to play. A slow Aldorian ballad, The Fields Before. The melody was simple, but it carried weight, each phrase landing like a footstep. It told of a farm boy who went to war, leaving behind his family and the wheat fields he loved, only to return to find them burned. She sang softly, voice low so as not to disturb the sleeping palace. We marched at dawn, the sky aflame, with banners bright and hearts the same. But ash and stone were all I found, where golden fields once kissed the ground. Her voice caught on the last line. She let the final chord fade. Thalanor did not speak for a long moment. At home, he said at last. They sing of your armies as invaders, ruthless, hungry. But your song mourns land and loss, not conquest. Stories change depending on who tells them, she said. Music doesn't lie as easily. He inclined his head slightly. No, it does not. A breeze drifted through the balcony, cool against her skin. She realized suddenly how close they were standing, only a few feet apart. Close enough that she could see the faint gold flecks in his blue eyes, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time since she'd met him. It unsettled her. I should rest, she said, standing abruptly. Big days ahead, ceremonies, obligations, more subtle insults from your counselor. A faint smile touched his lips. You handled him well. Thank you, she said automatically, then frowned. I mean, good night, princess, he said before she could untangle her response. He stepped back into the room and left without another word. Seraphine stared after him. Then she looked down at her lute, at the strings that still trembled faintly from their shared melodies. She was not ready to forgive him. Not ready to accept this fate as anything but a political cage. But for the first time since leaving Aldoria, she felt a sliver of something other than resentment. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first note of it. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Every morning, Seraphine was expected to attend lessons in elven court etiquette. Gesture, posture, phrasing, all led by Melian, whose expression rarely softened beyond polite tolerance. Afternoons were dedicated to ceremonial preparation, including discussions about the joining ritual and the musical performance expected of the couple. Thalanor attended some sessions, though often he was pulled away for council meetings. Whenever he wasn't present, the room felt sharper, colder, but when he was there, a strange tension hummed through the lessons. Not hostile, not exactly friendly, but charged. One afternoon, Lyra escorted Seraphine to the East Pavilion, where the first official music rehearsal would take place. It was an open-air hall supported by pale stone columns, vines twining around them in elegant patterns. Thalanor stood there already, silver lyre in hand. He inclined his head politely. Princess. Prince? Their voices were formal, but their eyes held something else. A flicker of remembrance from that night on her balcony. The elven musicians gathered, waiting. Uranus strode in moments later, robes sweeping across the floor. He offered a curt smile. Let us begin. The song of binding requires harmony in spirit as well as in sound. I trust both of you have practiced. Seraphine restrained a sigh. We have. Good, Arena said. Then show us. Thalanor lifted his silver lyre. We begin on my cue. Seraphine nodded. She raised her lute, and they played. The first phrases were formal and structured, part of the ancient song of binding traditionally performed at royal unions. The melody followed strict intervals, precise, ceremonial, unyielding. But as they moved into the transition, Thalanor's gaze flicked to her. A silent question. Seraphine answered by shifting her fingering, weaving in the subtle human variation they had discovered together. The notes curved into something warmer, gentler, something shared. Voices murmured among the elven musicians. Thalanor followed her lead, responding with a graceful elven flourish, echoing her added notes. The melody unfurled between them like a conversation, hesitant at first, then blooming into unexpected harmony. When the final chord faded, silence hung heavy. Aranis stared at them as though they had committed sacrilege. That was not the traditional arrangement. No, Thalanor said calmly, but it honors both cultures. Aranis' eyes narrowed. Innovation is not the purpose of the Song of Binding. Unity is, Seraphine said, and unity requires compromise. The counselor's face tightened. Queen Lirael, who had arrived unannounced at the edge of the pavilion, spoke up. Enough. Everyone bowed. Lirael stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled group before settling on her son and the princess. The arrangement is unexpected, she said slowly, but not unwelcome. Aranis stiffened. Your Majesty. The song will evolve with this union, she said. Let them continue. Aranis swallowed his protest, bowing tightly. As you wish. Seraphine shot Thalanor a small, triumphant glance. He didn't smile, but his eyes did. Despite the queen's endorsement, Seraphine sensed something shifting in the palace. Whispers followed her through the corridors. Some servants bowed respectfully. Others avoided her gaze, and more than once she felt eyes on her when she practiced alone or walked to evening suppers. One night, after finishing a late rehearsal, Seraphine made her way back to her chambers. The moonlight spilled across the marble floors, the palace unusually quiet. Melian had been dismissed early, and Lyra was off assisting with preparations in the central hall. Seraphine welcomed the solitude, until the light flickered. She paused. Hello? No answer. She continued walking. Another flicker, then sudden darkness as one of the floating lanterns sputtered out entirely. Seraphine's breath caught. The corridor dimmed, shadows stretching unnaturally long. A low, scraping sound echoed behind her. She spun around. Who's there? A figure stepped from the darkness at the far end of the hallway. Cloaked, hooded, face hidden. Seraphine backed away, pulse pounding. The figure moved toward her, silent and purposeful. She turned and ran. Her slippers skidded on the polished floor as she sprinted toward the nearest staircase. Behind her, footsteps quickened. Just as she reached the landing, the cloaked figure lunged. A cold flash of metal sliced the air. Seraphine gasped and stumbled, catching herself on the wall. The figure raised the blade again. A blur of silver struck from the side as someone slammed into the attacker, knocking them off balance. The dagger clattered across the floor. Thalanor? He moved with sharp, controlled fury. No hesitation, no elegance now, only lethal precision. He pinned the attacker against the wall, forcing back the hood. A young elf snarled, eyes burning with hatred. Traitor! He spat at Thalanor. You would bind our blood to theirs? Kaelin, Thalanor said, breath tight. You fool. Kaelin struggled against his grip. We will not bow to humans. We will not dilute our people. Better war than this shame. Seraphine pressed a hand to her chest, heart racing. Guards arrived moments later, responding to the noise. Kaelin thrashed as they seized him. You cannot stop us. Others stand with me. The Union will fall. The war will rise anew. Take him away, Thalanor ordered. The guards dragged Kaelin off, his shouts fading into the distance. Silence returned to the corridor, heavy and cold. Thalanor turned to Seraphine. Are you hurt? She shook her head, though her knees felt weak. No, just shaken. He stepped closer, studying her face for any sign of injury. His hand hovered near her arm, as though unsure if he had permission to touch. Finally, gently, he guided her toward the wall. Sit. She did. He knelt in front of her, breath uneven. I should have walked you back. I knew dissent was rising, but I didn't expect them to target you so soon. Seraphine swallowed. He called you a traitor. Yes. His jaw clenched. Some elves believe our blood is sacred, untainted. They oppose the union vehemently. And humans, she said softly. We have radicals too. I know. He reached out again, hesitating, and then brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. The gesture was surprisingly gentle. You could have died. So could you, she whispered. His eyes met hers, blue, intense, unguarded. Your life is now tied to mine, he said quietly. For peace to hold, I must protect you. She felt warmth rise in her chest, fear, relief, and something deeper she didn't dare name. And you, she asked, do you want the marriage, truly? Thalanor looked away, expression shadowed. Want is complicated, but I want peace, and I am beginning to believe you want the same. I do. Their gazes held. For the first time, there was no anger between them, no politics, only understanding, only music. The queen ordered additional guards stationed outside Seraphine's chambers. She was escorted everywhere by at least 2 attendants, but Thalanor stayed close too, more than before, and evening after the attack, he found her in the palace's moonlit garden. She sat beside a small pool, its surface glowing faintly from the magical stones beneath. Silver flowers swayed in the breeze, emitting soft luminescence. She was playing her lute, a quiet melody drifting into the night air. Thalanor approached slowly. Is that the ballad from the other night? She nodded. I changed it after everything that happened. He sat beside her. May I hear it? Seraphine took a breath and started again. The new version was softer, more tentative. It held sorrow, but also resilience. The melody rose higher than before, reaching for something beyond grief. When she finished, the garden was still. It's better, Thalanor said quietly. More honest. She set the lute aside. The song was about loss, but now I think it's about survival. Thalanor didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was low. My father, he said. He died in the war, 5 years ago, a border skirmish that spiraled out of control. Seraphine's breath caught. My mother never forgave humans for it, he continued. And I learned early that duty can demand everything we have. Seraphine stared at the reflecting pool. My mother died in the war too, Magefire. His posture softened. I did not know. There were no survivors. I am sorry. She nodded. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it was not heavy. It was shared. Do you regret accepting the marriage? She asked quietly. Yes, he said, and then before she could react, but not for the reasons I expected. Seraphine turned to him. Thalanor continued, eyes fixed on the glowing water. I thought I would resent you, that I would see only the war, only what was taken from us. But instead, I find myself wanting this to work. She felt her heart stutter. For our kingdoms, he added, but his voice wavered just enough to betray something more. Seraphine's voice was barely a whisper. I want it to work too. He exhaled slowly, tension slipping from his shoulders. Then perhaps we are no longer enemies. No, she said softly, we aren't. He looked at her then, really looked. The space between them felt suddenly fragile, electric, if he reached out, if she leaned in. A rustling noise broke the moment. They both tensed. A servant hurried into the garden, bowing low. Your Highnesses, the Queen requests your presence immediately. Their eyes locked again. Not enemies, not yet lovers, but something new, something fragile and dangerous and world-changing. They stood, together. Queen Lirael stood in the council chamber, face carved from ice. Aranis hovered beside her like an anxious shadow. Guards lined the walls. A prisoner knelt in the center. Kaelin, bruised but defiant. As Thalanor and Seraphine entered, Kaelin's eyes flared with hatred. The traitor prince and his human bride-to-be, he spat. Come to witness the end of your farce? Lirael raised a hand for silence. We have interrogated him, she said. Kalen has revealed the existence of a dissident faction known as the Thornshade Circle. Seraphine stiffened. More of them. Aranis scowled. They lurk in the shadows. Their goal is simple: destroy the Union and reignite the war. Kalen sneered. Better flames of war than chains of compromise. Thalanor's jaw tightened. And what then? More death? More loss? You would doom both kingdoms. Kalen laughed. Peace with humans is a lie. You will see. Others are already moving. The joining ceremony will never happen. Seraphine felt ice crawl down her spine. Mother, Thalanor said, we must increase security, double the guards, search every hall, question every servant. We will, Queen Lirael said, but the threat is greater than we knew. Aranis added grimly, we believe humans may have infiltrated as well. There are whispers of Aldorian extremists crossing the border. Seraphine's stomach tightened. My people. Not your people, Thalanor said sharply. Fanatics exist everywhere. The queen stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You cannot leave each other's side until the ceremony. It is the only way to ensure your safety. Seraphine blinked. Together, at all times? Yes, Lirael said, at all times. Thalanor glanced at Seraphine. Seraphine exhaled. Very well, she said. Kalen laughed from the floor. You will fail. Your union will fall. The war is not over. Thalanor stepped toward him, eyes blazing. Yes, it is. He looked at Seraphine. Because we will end it. She met his gaze steadily. Together. Late that night, escorted by guards, Thalanor walked Seraphine back to her chambers. 2 rooms had been prepared side by side with a shared inner door, now required to remain unlocked. When they reached the threshold, Seraphine paused. Thalanor. Yes. Are you afraid? He hesitated. Then, softly. Yes. She nodded. Me too. He stepped closer, the moonlight outlining the sharp lines of his face, the vulnerability beneath. We will survive this, he said firmly. You and I, we will. She wanted to believe him, and, somehow, she did. Before he stepped away, he lightly touched her hand, barely a brush of fingers, almost accidental. Her breath caught. Good night, he murmured. Good night. The door closed between them, but the connection remained. Their music lingered in the air. Their trust, fragile but real, had begun to take root, and in the shadows of Lunareth, the Thornshade Circle prepared for their next move. The palace changed after the attack. Extra guards patrolled the corridors. Wards shimmered faintly along the windows and doorways, visible now to even untrained eyes. Servants moved more quickly, speaking in hushed tones, as if any loud voice might crack the fragile peace. Seraphine and Thalanor, by decree, became nearly inseparable. They trained together, ate together, attended councils together. It was, at first, suffocating, and then, slowly, it became something else. One afternoon, they stood side by side on a high balcony overlooking Lunareth's central square. Below, workers raised an intricate platform of wood and pale stone, shaped like an open blossom. Silver thread was being strung between carved pillars. The joining dais, Thalanor explained. When we stand there, the wards of both kingdoms will be bound. Through a song, Seraphine said, yes. She watched the workers for a moment, then glanced at him. About that song, he turned. You dislike the arrangement? I dislike that it belongs to everyone but us. She leaned against the railing. We're the ones who have to stand up there. The song of binding is traditional, fine, but I think we should add something of our own, a new melody, a shared one. He studied her quietly. You think our people will accept that? Some won't accept us no matter what we do, she said frankly, so we may as well be honest. A faint smile touched his lips. You are reckless. You sound like that's a bad thing. It depends. His gaze softened. What did you have in mind? She hesitated. I've been working on something, a piece. It's not finished. He raised a brow. You've been composing without me? You were busy being a prince, she said, then added, quieter. I didn't know if you'd want to hear it. He gestured. Play it for me. They moved to a nearby alcove where a bench overlooked a cascade of water tumbling from a carved stone dragon's mouth. Seraphine retrieved her lute. She carried it everywhere these days. Another decree she'd bent into a comfort. She sat, took a breath, and began. The opening was simple, a single, clear melody line in a human mode. It sounded like Aldoria, steady, earnest, resilient. But then the tune bent unexpectedly, slipping into the more fluid, spiraling intervals of elven music before resolving again into human warmth. She didn't sing, not yet. When she finished, her heart pounded. Well, she asked, if you hate it, I'll pretend I never. It's beautiful, Thalanor said before she could finish. Incomplete, but beautiful. Incomplete, she swallowed. I thought maybe you could help finish it, add your parts. My parts, he echoed. Elven flourishes, she clarified quickly, feeling suddenly foolish. Silver lyre lines, that sort of thing. He sat beside her, closer than strictly necessary. Sing it this time. She blinked. What? Music is different when it's voiced, he said. I want to hear the words you chose. She hesitated, then nodded. Again, she began to play. This time, she let the words rise with the melody. From red gold fields and silver trees, from broken oaths and fallen leaves, we walk a line both sharp and thin, between the worlds of loss and sin. But if your hand will cover mine, and if your voice will meet my line, then maybe from this shattered ground, a different song can yet be found. Her voice trembled slightly on the last line. Silence followed. Thalanor's expression was unreadable, but his eyes were on her like she was the only thing in Lunareth. Seraphine, he said quietly, this is not just a song. She tried to laugh. What else would it be? A choice, he said. A promise. Her mouth went dry. It doesn't have an ending, she said, focusing on the practical. I can't decide how it should resolve. A perfect cadence feels dishonest. But something unfinished might unsettle the court. He considered that. Then we don't end. Not fully. We leave it, reaching. A shiver ran through her. She nodded. Help me. He stood. Come, the music rooms have better acoustics, and a silver lyre. He offered his hand. She took it. They walked back into the palace, fingers intertwined, neither of them mentioning it. Preparing the new piece was the closest thing to peace either of them had felt in years. They met daily in a tall, airy practice hall whose windows overlooked the Moonveil Forest. Thalanor brought his silver lyre. Seraphine brought her lute, her voice, and her stubbornness. They argued about intervals, debated endings, rewrote verses. You're turning that line into a declaration of surrender, she protested one afternoon, brow furrowed as she paced. Thalanor, seated on the edge of a low platform, plucked a thoughtful chord. I'm softening a threat. There is a difference. There's a line between softening and bowing. And there's a line between defiance and needless provocation. Spoken like a prince raised in council rooms, she muttered. He arched a brow. Spoken like a princess who once threatened to throw a goblet at a counselor's head. She blinked. Who told you that? General Rowan, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Apparently you were 13. He had it coming, she said, but her lips twitched. Despite the bickering, the piece grew. It began with a human melody, was answered by an elven counter-melody, and wove them gradually together until they moved as one. The lyrics spoke of fields and forests, of blood and regret, of choosing to stand side by side rather than across a battlefield. It felt dangerous. It felt right. Still, not everyone agreed. One afternoon, Aranis arrived unannounced during rehearsal. He listened, arms folded, expression increasingly stony. When they finished, he spoke without preamble. You intend to perform that at the joining? Yes, Seraphine said. No, Aranis countered, turning to Thalanor. It is too raw, too personal. The ceremony requires stability, not confession. Thalanor's jaw tightened. It is honest. Our people deserve that. Our people are frightened, Aranis snapped. They cling to tradition because they fear everything else has changed beyond recognition. And if we never offer them anything new, Seraphine said quietly, they will remain afraid forever. His gaze snapped to hers. Careful, princess. You walk on sacred ground. I'm marrying into this kingdom, she said. It will be my ground too. For a heartbeat, Aranis looked as though he might say something cutting. Instead, he simply drew in a breath. The Thornshade Circle remains a threat, he said. We have uncovered 2 more sympathizers among the servant ranks. Both claimed they were inspired by rumors that the joining would strip Lunareth of its identity. His gaze sharpened. You feed those fears with this song? Thalanor stepped forward. Or we address them, directly, openly. If we pretend nothing has changed, we hand the narrative to the extremists. Aranis's face hardened. I pray you know what you're doing, my prince. He swept out of the hall without bowing. Silence pressed in behind him. Seraphine exhaled. He hates me. He fears what you represent, Thalanor said. There is a difference. Is there? She asked. Yes, he looked at her. He cares deeply about Lunareth, but his fear blinds him. That makes him dangerous and pitiful. She considered that. You still trust him. Thalanor hesitated. I trust that he loves our people. I do not trust what he will do for that love. Her fingers brushed the strings of her lute. We'll need to be careful. We will be, he said. He met her gaze, and in his eyes she saw something solid, something fiercely loyal. She clung to it. They went back to work. The night before the joining ceremony, Lunara pulsed with restless energy. Lanterns burned brighter than usual. Garlanded bridges hung with silver and red ribbons connected districts. The air rang with distant laughter, the rustle of silk, the low thrum of drums and flutes from taverns and plazas. From her balcony, Seraphine watched elves and humans move side by side through the streets below. Some walked together, talking easily. Others kept their distance, suspicion in every glance. Lyra stepped out beside her, carrying a small box. They're almost ready in the main hall. Decorations for the ceremony. She hesitated. Are you nervous? Seraphine gave a short, breathy laugh. Is that a trick question? Lyra smiled. I meant, more than usual. Yes, Seraphine said simply. The last time this many people looked at me at once, I was riding away from home under guard. Lyra's expression sobered. I remember the whispers when we heard a human princess was coming. Some were curious, many were angry. She swallowed. But I'm glad you came. Warmth pricked Seraphine's eyes. Thank you. Lyra opened the box, revealing a delicate circlet of intertwined metal, gold and silver braided together, dotted with tiny blue stones. This is for you, from the Queen. Seraphine blinked. From Queen Lirael? She had it made for the joining, Lyra said. It blends Aldorian goldwork with Lunaran design. To symbolize... She trailed off, then shrugged. You know. Unity, Seraphine said softly. Her fingers brushed the circlet. It was beautiful. It suits you, Lyra said. Strong, not overly ornamental. Seraphine smiled. Maybe the Queen knows me better than I thought. Lyra hesitated. She watches more than she speaks. A faint shadow crossed her face. Everyone does, these days. Seraphine looked down at the circlet again, then out at the city. Lyra, she said quietly, if something goes wrong tomorrow, if people panic... They will, Lyra said frankly. Seraphine huffed. Comforting. I mean if they do, Lyra amended. They will also be watching you and the prince. Whatever you do, they will follow. Seraphine's throat tightened. That's the problem. That's your power, Lyra corrected gently, and he knows it too. Seraphine felt a surge of fear, then steadied it with stubborn resolve. I won't run, she whispered. I know, Lyra said. Later, Thalanor knocked once and stepped into the adjoining chamber. Seraphine stood near the window, fingers tracing the circlet's braided bands. You've seen it, he said. Yes, she glanced at him. Your mother commissioned it? She did, he said. She thought you should wear something that is truly yours, not borrowed. That's almost kind, Seraphine said. Is she feeling well? He smiled faintly. Do not mistake steel for ice. It's there, under the surface. You or her? She asked. Both, he said. He came to stand beside her, looking out at the city. Tomorrow, he said quietly, everything changes. It already has, she replied. I met you. He looked at her sharply. She hadn't quite meant to say it like that. Her cheeks warmed, but she held his gaze. Seraphine, he said after a moment, voice low. Do you regret any of this now? She thought of Aldoria, of her father's tired eyes, of fields scorched and villages broken. She thought of Lunareth's glowing bridges, of Thalanor's music on her balcony, of the way his hand had trembled slightly after he'd pulled her away from Kaelin's blade. I regret the war, she said. I regret the loss. I regret that this is what it took to make people listen. He swallowed. And us? She took a breath. I thought I would hate you forever, she said honestly. I wanted to. It was easier. But then you played that song, and you risked yourself for me, and you listened, truly listened, to my music, to my fears, to my anger. Her voice shook. I don't regret you, she finished, barely audible. Not anymore. Something broke open in his expression. In 2 strides he was closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his breath. I feared you, he admitted, not as a human, not as a princess, but as a mirror. You forced me to see what we've done, what I've done, and yet you still stand here, with me. I do, she said, his hand lifted, hovering near her face. May I? He whispered. She nodded. His fingers brushed her cheek, feather light. The world narrowed to the heat of his touch, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the thrum of her heartbeat in her ears. He bent his head. Their lips met. It was not a triumphant kiss, not the fiery clash she'd once imagined when thinking of enemies. It was hesitant at first, then deepening, fragile and trembling, full of unsaid apologies and newly formed hopes. She leaned into it, hand curling lightly in the front of his tunic. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder. Well, he said, slightly dazed, that complicates things. She laughed, breathless, as if they weren't complicated enough. He rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, when we stand on that dais, I will be there as your prince, yes, as Lunareth's heir, but also as myself, Thalanor, just Thalanor, and I will choose you, not just for duty. Her eyes stung. Thalanor. I need you to know that, he said. If something happens... Don't, she pressed a finger to his lips. Now if something happens. Tomorrow we survive. Together, then we can write all the complicated songs we want. He smiled against her fingertip. Very well, he murmured. Together. They stayed like that a little longer, memorizing the feel of each other under the lantern's glow. Then they parted for the night, hearts no longer at war, but beating in wary, hopeful unison. Lunara awoke to bells. They rang from the high towers, clear and bright, cutting through the morning mist. Elves and humans alike streamed toward the central square, dressed in their finest. Vendors handed out ribbons in red and silver, children wove them into their hair, laughing, unaware of the history balanced on this day. The joining dais stood ready, a wide platform in the middle of the square, accessible by 4 staircases, one from each cardinal direction. Above it, an arch of living branches curved gracefully, woven with flowers that glowed softly even in daylight. Seraphine's hands shook as Lyra helped fasten the circlet into her hair. You are not alone, Lyra whispered. Seraphine nodded, drawing in slow, measured breaths. Her gown was a perfect blend of both kingdoms, Aldorian cut, Lunaran fabric. Deep red panels flowed beneath sheer layers of pale blue, embroidered with silver and gold threads that created patterns of intertwining leaves and wheat stalks. When she stepped into the corridor, Thalanor was waiting. He wore ceremonial armor that caught the light, a breastplate etched with starbark leaves, pauldrons of pale metal, a sash of Aldorian red at his waist. He stared at her. You are uncomfortable, she said. And you? He huffed a laugh. Terrified. Good. We match. They walked together toward the light. The square was already full when they emerged onto the balcony overlooking it. A murmur rose from the crowd. Curiosity, awe, skepticism, resentment, all mixing into a low roar. Queen Lirael and King Alden stood near the dais, flanked by guards from both kingdoms. Seraphine's father looked thinner than she remembered, but his eyes shone when he saw her. "Daughter," he breathed as she approached. "Father." She embraced him, careful not to crush the circlet. "You made it." "Nothing short of death would have kept me away," he said. He cupped her face, eyes glistening. "Your mother would be proud and terrified, much like your prince, I imagine." Thalanor bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty." King Alden studied him, then nodded. "You protected her. That is not forgotten." Thalanor inclined his head. "I will continue to." A horn sounded. Aranis stepped forward, holding a staff topped with a carved sigil that shimmered with light. "Citizens of Lunareth, people of Aldoria, today we stand at the edge of an age long foretold. The war that has scarred our lands ends here, not with fire and blood, but with binding and song." The crowd fell quiet. Seraphine and Thalanor ascended the dais. As they took their places beneath the woven arch, Seraphine felt the magic in the air, subtle but undeniable. The ward lines of Lunara and the distant wards of Aldoria hummed in resonance, vibrating along the edges of her awareness. Thalanor's hand brushed hers. "Ready?" he whispered. "No," she whispered back. "Do it anyway." The traditional song of binding began first, sung by a choir of elves and humans arranged around the dais. It was old, solemn, heavy with history. They joined in on the final refrain, voices blending as they had practiced. Then came their moment. Lyra stepped forward and handed Seraphine her lute. Another attendant placed the silver lyre into Thalanor's waiting hands. The crowd rippled. This was not usual. Aranis's voice carried. "By decree of crown and council, the heirs present now their own vow, in music born of both lands." Seraphine caught a fleeting look on his face, tension, distrust, but also resolve. He had agreed then, however reluctantly. She met Thalanor's eyes. He nodded. They began. The first notes rose clear and strong, carrying across the square. Seraphine's lute laid down the opening human melody. Thalanor's silver lyre answered with an elven echo. Their voices joined, weaving verses that confessed grief and fear, and the choice to step forward anyway. "We come from ash, from wounded earth, from broken lines and bitter birth. But here we stand on shattered stone, and say we will not stand alone." For a moment the crowd listened, spellbound, until the first scream. A ripple of motion surged near the back of the square. Someone shouted. Then another voice took up a word Seraphine couldn't quite hear. Thalanor faltered. "Keep going," Seraphine hissed under her breath. "If we stop now, panic wins." His knuckles whitened around the silver lyre's neck. More movement. Guards clashed with figures emerging from the crowd, some cloaked, others not. A flare of magic burst like a star, sending a group of people stumbling. Kaelin's words echoed in her memory. "The Union will fall, the war will rise anew." "Thornshade," Thalanor growled. "Not just them," Seraphine said, eyes scanning the chaos. She spotted flashes of Aldorian steel in places no Aldorian guard should be. "Some are mine?" Her stomach lurched. A thrown knife arced toward the dais. She saw it too late. Thalanor moved. He knocked her sideways, the blade slicing past them to bury itself in the wood. The music shattered, strings buzzing discordantly as his silver lyre slipped from his grip. Chaos exploded. More cloaked figures rushed the guards at the base of the dais. A blast of raw, unstable magic struck one of the arch's supporting branches, sending a shower of sparks and petals raining down. "Get them away!" someone shouted. It sounded like King Alden. Queen Lirael's voice cut through the tumult. "Hold the line! Protect the dais!" Seraphine pushed herself up, heart pounding. "Thalanor?" "I'm here," he said, already back on his feet. "Are you?" "I'm fine." She grabbed her lute, checking the strings. Miraculously, it was still intact. The song. "Seraphine," he said, eyes wide. "This is an attack. We have to—" "If we run," she said, "everything they said about us will be believed. That we're weak, that peace is a lie, that we can't stand together when it matters." A beam of hostile magic shot toward the dais. Thalanor raised his free hand, chanting a quick barrier spell. The shield shimmered into existence just in time, deflecting the blast. His face was strained. If we die here, there won't be a peace to protect. Her mind raced. Music doesn't lie as easily. The wards, she whispered, they're humming to the ceremony. To us, they're listening. Understanding flared in his eyes. You think we can? Amplify, she said. Push our intent through them, through the song. Lull the crowd. Expose the attackers. That's theory, he said. Dangerous theory. Do you have a better idea? He glanced at the chaos around them. Guards clashed with extremists on all sides. The crowd was beginning to panic, pressing outward in fear. If they broke and stampeded, many innocent people would die. He turned back to her. No, he said, I don't. He picked up his silver lyre. Then we play, she said. And if the magic rejects us, he asked. She tightened her grip on the lute. Then at least we tried as more than symbols. He smiled. Not the polite, guarded expression she'd first known, but something fierce and bright. Side by side, then, he said. Always, she replied. They turned toward the crowd. Thalanor summoned his voice, resonant and commanding, and shouted, Listen to us. For a heartbeat, the square quieted, they began again. This time, the music did not merely carry across the square. It surged, backed by more than breath and vibration. Thalanor's words shifted into the old, formal cadence of a binding spell. Seraphine threaded her own lyrics through his, translating intent into something hearts could grasp. Hear now this vow, in blood and tone. We claim this path, not ours alone. Lay down your fear, your rage, your spite, and stand with us in common light. The ward lines responded. Seraphine felt it, a thrum under her feet, a pressure in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Magic flowed through the arch, down the dais, into their instruments. Light flared along the edges of the square, tracing invisible boundaries. The crowd stilled, not frozen, but quieted, attention locked on the dais as if the song held them fast. A cloaked attacker tried to strike a nearby guard, his arm slowed, muscles seeming to drag through invisible resistance. Another conspirator lifted a staff to cast, only for the spell to sputter uselessly as the ambient magic refused to answer. The Thornshade Circle and their human allies struggled, faces contorting with frustration. Seraphine's voice soared. Thalanor's silver lyre rang. Their melody braided together, a living promise. King Alden stared in astonishment. Queen Lirael's eyes shone with something like pride. Aranis clutched his staff tightly, lips moving, not to interfere, but to stabilize the wards, anchoring the flow instead of redirecting it. Sweat beaded his brow. You stubborn, reckless children, he muttered under his breath. Very well, let's see if you can carry it. On the dais, Seraphine and Thalanor reached the piece's unfinished section, the part they had never quite resolved. In that suspended moment, the entire square held its breath. Thalanor's fingers hovered over the strings. Seraphine, he whispered, not sure if she could even hear him in the rush of power. How do we end this? Her answer was clear, ringing even without sound. Not with a perfect cadence, but with a promise to keep moving. She shifted the melody, guiding it upward instead of neatly closing it, letting the phrase hang, open, yearning. Thalanor followed, layering harmonies that shimmered like distant stars. We do not swear that fear will fade, nor promise scars will all be stayed. We only vow, in dark or day, to choose this path and choose and stay. The final chord did not land. It ascended, then softened, dissolving into echo. The wards accepted it. A soft wave of magic rolled out from the dais, not forceful, but pervasive. Those in the crowd felt their racing hearts slow, their breaths deepen. The air seemed less jagged, less sharp. The extremists, stripped of the chaos they'd tried to create, found themselves exposed and outnumbered. Guards from both kingdoms moved in, coordinated now. A few saboteurs tried to flee. The ward lines flared, forming temporary barriers that redirected them into waiting hands. Kaelin, who had somehow escaped confinement amid the chaos, stared up at the dais in disbelief, wrists bound by elven light and human iron. This won't last, he spat, even as he was dragged away. You can't bind hearts with a song. Thalanor looked down at him, eyes steady. No, he said, but we can open them. Seraphine's arms ached. Her voice felt raw. But when she looked out over the square, she saw something she had not seen in years. Hope, tentative, fragile, but real. The immediate danger passed. Extremists were disarmed and taken into custody. Healers moved through the crowd, tending to those who had been knocked down or caught in stray bursts of magic. Remarkably few had been seriously injured. The square buzzed with hushed, stunned conversation. Up on the dais, Seraphine and Thalanor stood facing each other beneath the arch, the weight of what they'd done settling around them like a cloak. Arrhenius approached, still gripping his staff. "For the record," he said, voice rough. "That was reckless, unprecedented, and could have unraveled the wards completely." Seraphine swallowed, but it didn't. He eyed them both, then exhaled, long and slow. "No," he said, "it did not." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "Instead, you two just rewrote half the doctrine on ceremonial magic." Thalanor's shoulders sagged with relief. "You helped." "I controlled fallout," Arrhenius said. "You created the storm." He studied them for a moment, his gaze softer than it had ever been. Perhaps this union has more potential than I allowed myself to believe." Queen Lirael joined them, King Alden at her side. "You took a great risk," Lirael said. "Yes," Seraphine replied. "I'm sorry if—" "Do not apologize," the Queen said sharply. Then, more quietly, "You did what needed to be done, and you did it together." King Alden placed a hand on Seraphine's shoulder. "Your mother always said you would change the world or destroy it trying." His eyes shone with pride and fear mixed. It appears she was half right. So far, only the world is changing. "Let us ensure it stays that way," Lirael said dryly. Around them, the crowd slowly began to cheer. It started hesitantly, a few voices, then more. Elves and humans both raised their hands, some pressing them over their hearts, others lifting them toward the dais. The sound rolled through the square like distant thunder, building, cresting. Arrhenius raised his staff, amplifying his voice. "Witness now, not just a pact of necessity, but a vow freely chosen. Seraphine Alden of Aldoria, Thalanor Virellen of Lunareth, do you stand, in the sight of both your peoples and the living magic of these lands, bound by your promise to seek peace together?" Seraphine met Thalanor's gaze. This, she thought, is the real moment. Not the music, not the magic. The choice? "I do," she said, her voice steady. "I do," he said, eyes unwavering. The arch above them bloomed, flowers bursting open in a cascade of silver and red petals that drifted down like gentle rain. The ward lines pulsed once, twice, then settled into a new rhythm, a shared one, neither entirely Aldorian nor entirely Lunaren. Arrhenius lowered his staff. "Then by that vow, by blood and song and choice, I pronounce this union bound." Thalanor stepped closer. "May I kiss you now?" he murmured, without it being a political statement. She smiled through the tears that had finally broken free. "It will always be a little of both." "I can live with that," he said. He kissed her. This time, the crowd erupted. Not everyone cheered. Some watched in wary silence. Some frowned, arms crossed. But no one could deny the power of what they'd seen. Two heirs, once enemies, standing at the center of a storm and choosing each other anyway. When they broke apart, Seraphine rested her forehead against his. "We're really married," she whispered. "Yes," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are." "And alive," she added, "for the moment." She laughed, breathless. Always the optimist. "Only since I met you," he said. They stood together on the dais, hand in hand, as Lunareth roared and the new woven wards hummed softly around them. The war was not erased. The past was not healed by one ceremony, one song, one kiss, but something had shifted. A door had opened, and in the quiet space between what had been and what might be, Seraphine and Thalanor stood side by side, ready to walk through it. Peace did not arrive as a single shining moment. It came in fragments, in meetings that lasted long into the night, in bitter arguments that ended not in swords, but in exhausted compromise, in letters exchanged between wary nobles, in the quiet work of mending roads and rebuilding villages, of opening trade routes where once there had been only war. The joining ceremony became legend before the week was out. Songs sprang up in taverns and marketplaces, wildly inaccurate and annoyingly catchy. Children tried to imitate Seraphine and Thalanor's open-ended cadence on whatever instruments they could find or invent. Someone even carved a crude wooden toy of the two of them standing under a crooked arch. Thalanor hated that toy. Seraphine bought one anyway. Extremists were tried before mixed courts of elves and humans. Some had their sentences softened when it was clear they'd been manipulated by fearmongers. Others, like Kalen and his closest human counterparts, faced long, grim years of confinement and labor. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was not revenge, and that mattered. Uranus proposed a joint council, half Aldorian, half Lunaran, to handle disputes. Queen Lirael and King Alden signed away powers their ancestors would have clung to with iron fists. Old authority must yield, Lirael said one evening, signing another decree with a tired hand, or there is no room for anything new. Seraphine watched the ink dry, feeling the weight of the moment. "Does it frighten you?" she asked. "Of course," the queen replied, "but I have spent enough of my life ruled by fear. It is time for something else." Thalanor squeezed Seraphine's hand under the table. "Besides," Lirael added dryly, "I seem to have acquired a reckless son and an equally reckless daughter-in-law. Someone must preserve a semblance of dignity while they overthrow tradition with songs." Seraphine tried not to grin. She failed? It was Seraphine's idea first. Or maybe it was both of theirs at once. They were sitting in the garden where they'd once shared confessions over a glowing pool, watching a group of children, some elven, some human, attempt to outsing one another. The resulting noise was impressive in its enthusiasm and terrible in every other way. "Do you hear that?" Seraphine said. Thalanor winced. "Unfortunately." "They have no technique," she said. "They have no mercy," he corrected. She laughed. Then, quieting, she watched one small elven boy carefully show a human girl how to shift her fingers on a reed flute, his gestures serious, his brow furrowed. The girl listened earnestly, trying to copy him. "They're trying," Seraphine murmured. "Children often do what adults cannot," Thalanor said. She turned to him. "We should build a place for them. For anyone. A school. No, better, an academy. Not just for nobles, for anyone who wants to learn music. Elves, humans, maybe one day dwarves, if they forgive us for that business with the tunnels." Thalanor's eyes lit. A place where both traditions are taught side by side. "Not just taught," she said. "Mixed, combined, experimented with. A place where what we did at the joining isn't strange, it's normal." He smiled slowly. "You want to institutionalize rebellion. I prefer formalize innovation. That may be worse." She bumped his shoulder with hers. "So that's a yes?" He looked back at the children. One of them, a human boy with wild dark hair, was now trying to copy an elven glissando on a battered Aldorian lute. It sounded awful. Thalanor's expression softened. "Yes," he said. "That's a yes." The academy took shape faster than Seraphine expected. Architects from Lunareth and Aldenfort collaborated, arguing over arches and acoustics, over materials and layouts, until they found something that felt like both and neither. A long, low building with large open practice halls and small, intimate studios. Windows that looked out over both forest and open fields. They named it the Academy of Strings and Stars. Funding came from both royal coffers and private donors. Uranus shocked everyone by contributing stacks of old scores and research texts, on the condition they're not used to warp the minds of impressionable youth. "They very much will be," Seraphine assured him. "I know," he sighed. Lyra volunteered as a liaison and organizer, endlessly patient and surprisingly fierce when it came to negotiations. Melian took charge of logistics, managing schedules and resources with military efficiency. "We will need rules," Melian said crisply as they walked the unfinished corridors together. "We will need flexibility," Seraphine countered. "Chaos," Melian muttered. "Creativity." Same thing. Despite the grumbling, Melian's eyes shone as she watched the first shipment of instruments arrive. Lutes and silver lyres, harps and drums, and unfamiliar elven pipes. "Students will break them," Seraphine warned. "I already ordered spares," Melian replied. For once, they smiled at the same time. Months passed. The academy opened its doors. The first class was small, experimental. A few noble sons and daughters, yes, but also sons of farmers, daughters of shopkeepers, a handful of orphans from both sides who had no families left but found belonging in melody and rhythm. Seraphine taught voice and Aldorian string traditions. Thalanor taught silver lyre and Lunaron composition. Sometimes they taught together. Music is not just sound, Thalanor told a room full of wide-eyed students one morning. It is intent made audible. If your intent is muddled, so is your music. So if I think about cake while I play, a human boy piped up, will my song taste sweet? Your song will be flat, Seraphine said. Like a badly baked cake, Thalanor added. The class laughed. Underneath the jokes, the work was serious. Students stumbled over unfamiliar modes. Some human children complained that elven scales felt crooked. Some elven adolescents sniffed that human harmonies were too heavy. Seraphine and Thalanor made them swap parts. Walk in each other's music, Seraphine urged. Then see what you think. By the end of the term, an Aldorian girl was composing eerie, floating melodies using elven intervals, while a Lunaron boy had developed a new style of rhythmic strumming that drove traditionalists mildly mad. Arenas came to observe one recital. He didn't smile, but he did stay until the end. Afterward, he approached Seraphine and Thalanor as students chattered around them. You realize you're making my job much harder, he said. How so? Thalanor asked. Because in 10 years, Arenas replied, these children will be in my council chambers demanding we change more things. Seraphine grinned. You poor man. He gave her a sidelong look. I find I'm strangely content with the prospect. Peace, even the fragile kind, did not erase grief. There were still border disputes to settle, old scars to tend. Not everyone forgave. Some never would. Seraphine traveled often between Aldoria and Lunareth now, accompanied by a mixed guard. In Aldoria, she was greeted as both traitor and savior, depending on who shouted louder at the time. On one visit, an old farmer spat as she passed. You married one of them, he snarled. You forget what they did to us? Seraphine stopped. No, she said quietly. I remember every day. That's why I did it. He glared. Words. She thought of Thalanor's face in the moonlit garden, of the attack at the ceremony, of the Academy's noisy halls. Come to Lunara, she said. Come see the Academy, hear their songs, then tell me again if it's only words. He snorted and turned away. Weeks later, she saw him at the back of an Academy recital hall, arms crossed, face stone-like, as he listened to his own granddaughter sing in a duet with an elven boy. He didn't clap, but he didn't leave. It was enough. In Lunareth, there were still muttered comments about diluted blood and softening resolve. Some elves avoided human shops and inns. Thalanor addressed them directly at a public forum. Softness, he told a crowd gathered beneath the starbark trees, is not weakness. It is the choice to bend instead of break. We chose war for centuries. It did not make us strong, it made us lonely. An old elven woman called out, And what has this union brought us but more confusion? He smiled sadly. Confusion is the first step toward learning something new. It did not convince everyone, but some listened, and that, too, was enough. For now, the first anniversary of their joining approached quietly. There were no grand parades planned, no elaborate ceremonies decreed. The kingdoms had had enough spectacle for a while, but the Academy whispered with secret preparations. On the evening of the anniversary, Seraphine and Thalanor were coaxed, then mildly bullied, into attending a student recital in the Academy's largest hall. We attend recitals every week, Seraphine protested as Lyra herded her along the corridor. This one is different, Lyra said. How? Thalanor asked. Suspicious? Melian stood at the hall's door, arms folded, blocking the way. For once, you two will sit down and not interfere. That's ominous, Seraphine murmured. They entered. The hall was full, students, instructors, visiting nobles, common citizens from both kingdoms. At the front stood a group of older students, instruments ready, faces pale but determined. The head instructor, an elderly bard from Aldoria, with laugh lines and sharp eyes, stepped forward. Tonight, we present a piece composed by the inaugural class of the Academy of Strings and Stars, in honor of those who decided the world could be something different. Seraphine's pulse quickened. Thalanor's fingers tightened around hers. The bard smiled. You may recognize parts of it. The students began to play. The melody that rose was familiar. Seraphine's hand flew to her mouth. It was their joining song, but not exactly. The students had taken the raw, open-ended piece Seraphine and Thalanor had written and lived through, and finished it, not by forcing a neat cadence, but by echoing and expanding the last unfinished phrase, passing it around the ensemble, human to elf, lute to silverlyre, harp to drum, voice to voice. The song swelled, layered with new harmonies that had never existed before this room, this moment. Lyrics had been added too, in both languages. We are the sound of fields and stars, of broken shields and mended scars, the echo of a choice once made, to stand as bridge, not burn as blade. We are not done, nor ever still, but walking, changing, bending will. And as long as our voices blend, the song goes on and will not end. The final chord did not slam shut, it settled gently, landing in a place that felt stable but open. A door half ajar, a road stretching into the distance. The room was silent for a long heartbeat. Then the applause came. It was thunderous. Wild. A roar that shook the rafters. Seraphine realized she was crying. Thalanor was too. They finished it, she whispered. The students finished our song. No, he said softly, eyes shining. They wrote their own. Lyra sniffed loudly behind them. Melian pretended to be annoyed, but clapped harder than anyone else. When the noise finally faded, one of the students, a lanky elf with ink-stained fingers and a human boy's Aldorian-style braid, stepped forward, looking terrified but resolute. Your Highnesses, he said, voice cracking slightly. We, all of us, we just wanted to say thank you for giving us something new to sing. Seraphine stood, throat tight. Thank you, she replied, voice thick, for proving it was worth it. Thalanor squeezed her hand. That night, after the hall had emptied and the academy had gone quiet, Seraphine and Thalanor walked alone through the Moonveil Forest. The starbark trees glowed softly, their sap pulsing with quiet magic. You know, Seraphine said, if someone had told me a few years ago that I'd be walking through a glowing elven forest with you, listening to students butcher our music in the best possible way. You would have accused them of madness, Thalanor finished. At minimum, she said. He chuckled. They stopped at a small clearing where a brook whispered over smooth stones. Fireflies drifted between the roots. Thalanor turned to her. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if there had been no treaty? No forced marriage? She thought of endless war, of Aldenfort's crumbling walls, of Lunareth's glowing arches shattered. Yes, she said, and I don't like what I see. Nor I, he murmured. He traced a gentle pattern along her knuckles. I don't regret it, any of it. Not anymore. Not even my dramatic entrance to Lunara, she teased. Especially that, he said. You terrified half the court. Good, she said. They fell quiet, the sounds of the forest wrapping around them. Do you think this will last? She asked finally. The peace, the academy, us. He looked up at the glowing canopy, then back at her. Nothing is guaranteed, he said. Not peace, not kingdoms, not songs. He squeezed her hand. All we can do is keep choosing it. Every day, every argument, every time someone tells us it's impossible. She leaned her head against his shoulder. That sounds exhausting. It will be, he said, but at least we'll be exhausted together. She smiled into the fabric of his tunic. Side by side? Always, he replied. In the distance, faintly, the academy bells chimed the hour. Somewhere a student practiced a new melody, stumbling, trying again. The war was not forgotten, the past was not erased, but in the spaces between sorrow and hope, between mistake and forgiveness, something new had begun to grow, fragile as a sprout, resilient as a starbark root. Seraphine lifted her head. Come on, husband, she said, the words still pleasantly strange on her tongue. Let's go write another song. Thalanor smiled, eyes bright. Lead the way, wife. Hand in hand, they walked back through the luminous trees, their shadows long and intertwined, their path uncertain but shared. The night above them was full of stars, the world ahead of them was full of music, and their story, like their song, was not an ending, but a beginning that would keep unfolding, note by note, day by day, as long as they chose to play it.